The so-called Tai Su meridian is also known as physiognomy, which can observe status, predict good or bad, calculate misfortunes and blessings, and be a good person. Do you dare to let the meridian be supported? One pulse counts as 10,000 gold. You see, how easy it is to make money, isn't it, to work? Ah bah. People live for 2 lifetimes, and Qin Liuxi's ideal is always to just get by. After all, there is always someone in the world who is willing to be a salted fish and not strive for progress. And let her do such useless things. But when a large family appeared in front of him in a pitiful and sorrowful state, Qin Liuxi's days of salted fish also disappeared. Faced with the precarious collapse of the Qin family, the maidservant begged for business with an empty money box. Qin Liuxi had to shoulder the heavy responsibility of being a young lady, managing the family, raising elders, and raising children. Qin Liuxi. I was clearly using a salted fish script, but who stole it for me? Cousin who was scolded by the young lady and became suspicious of life. It feels like the older sister is looking at us like she's in trouble. Qin Sangong, who was beaten up by the young lady and taught to be a good person. Be bold and remove the feeling. Qin Xiaowu, who was autistic by the young lady, said. Big sister is mine, dear, no one wants to snatch it. Later, someone asked Qin Liuxi what his dream would be if his life were to start over again. Qin Liuxi remained silent for a long time. Strive for 100 years without striving for progress. Keywords of the novel. Miss, she always doesn't strive for progress without pop-ups. Miss, she always doesn't strive for progress. Download the complete text collection. Miss, she always doesn't strive for progress. Read the latest chapters. Chapter 1. The Qin family was copied. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 1. The Qin family was copied. The Qin family has finally been plagiarized. And on this day, I have been waiting for 10 years. 10 years ago, I traveled with full-level physiognomy, and as soon as I opened my eyes, I calculated that my family would inevitably suffer this calamity. And I am the only turning point. But without waiting for me to take the trouble to resolve the family, I was exiled to the countryside by my unscrupulous ancestors. Qin Liuxi looked at the group of people squeezed in the flower hall by Wu Yangyang. One by one, they were wet, but their expressions were haughty. Most of the time, they couldn't recognize reality and even considered themselves high-ranking aristocrats. Qin Liuxi sighed, and the old lady, who was also the leader, said, "Grandmother, your granddaughter has already had someone prepare ginger soup and hot water. Drink some ginger soup first, take a hot bath to cool off before speaking." Mrs. Qin was taken aback, with a momentary doubt in her eyes. They didn't even inform the Qin family of the news of plagiarism. Where did this girl get the news from and prepare everything in advance? After all, the long-distance rush and physical exhaustion left Mrs. Qin powerless to investigate. She nodded and said, "You can arrange it." Qin Liuxi asked Aunt Li and others to queue up with these dozen or so people to wash up. When their gaze fell on a woman with a big belly, their eyelids twitched. This is really a house leak, but it happens to rain continuously at night. The Qin family had a sudden incident, which caused them to have no time to hide anything when stealing the house. Not only did they not bring anything valuable from the house, but they even took off their hairpin rings and brocade clothes. Otherwise, the women would not be wearing simple plain skirts and inner garments. This is not a big deal, just a simple meal. She would never let these people go hungry, but what's difficult is that this woman with a big belly, who happened to be in a major disaster, was too frightened, mentally weak, had fetal movements and was about to give birth, and her face was almost covered by black hair. Qin Liuxi turned his head and whispered a few words to Qi Huang, who was following him, who quickly walked out. Sure enough, as Qi Huang walked forward, the woman let out a painful cry and fell to the ground with her belly in her arms. Blood slowly stained her white skirt red from under her body. Suddenly, the people still in the flower hall were horrified by the accident, their faces turning pale, and they screamed in surprise. Third younger brother and sister. A woman with a slightly haggard face, but without losing her composure, rushed over and helped the woman who was lying on the ground groaning in her arms. "Pain, my stomach hurts so much." Gu groaned as she hugged her stomach, her face turning snowy, and cold sweat oozing from her forehead. "Mother," Wang looked at Mrs. Qin and said with a pale face, "I'm afraid the third younger brother and sister are going to have children." Mrs. Qin's body softened. Although her youngest daughter Law is having her second child, she is pregnant with twins. Now, she is only 7 months old, and if she gives birth prematurely, can these 2 children survive? Not to mention 2 children, but only the mother, who has gone through great difficulties and is both mentally and physically shocked. Giving birth in such a situation is as dangerous as walking on the edge of a cliff. Mrs. Qin closed her eyelids and suddenly felt sadness in her heart. The Qin family has been sailing smoothly for decades, and once the building collapses, is this the fate of the Qin family? Mother. Mrs. Qin bit her tongue hard and felt the salty smell of blood. She opened her eyes and took a deep breath. "I'm going to help Mr. Gu deliver the baby." She looked at Qin Liushi on the side again. Qin Liushi immediately stepped forward and said, "Grandmother, your granddaughter has sent someone to invite Grandma Wan. Please rest assured and move Aunt San to the delivery room first." Mrs. Qin looked around and saw a house of children and their families who were afraid and trembling due to being frightened. However, she didn't expect that it would be Qin Liushi, a girl who had just reached her hairpin, who could help. At the beginning of the 6 chapters, I will make some minor revisions and cut out some useless words and chapters. The plot will not affect it, and the same goes for the rest. Please ignore the ideas of the previous chapters or hidden chapters 1.4 to avoid misleading and confusion, as it is already the previous ideas that cannot be deleted. Thanks. End of this chapter. Chapter 2. Adding insult to injury. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 2. Adding insult to injury. Mrs. Qin pointed to Mrs. Xie and said, "From the second family, take Aunt Pan and the others to settle the children first. Mrs. Wang and Mrs. Mei will be serving in the delivery room. Once they are settled, come and help." "Yes, mother." Qin Liushi instructed Chen Pai to lead people to settle her, while she and Qi Huang moved Gu Shi to the prepared delivery room. At this moment, she felt a headache. On weekdays, she likes to be quiet and doesn't like to go out, so there aren't many servants arranged in the old house. The Qi Huang siblings follow her, and there is Uncle Li's family in the house, but they are only 4 people. Aunt Li and her daughter Xiaoxue are in charge of the kitchen and some miscellaneous matters. Uncle Li and a young man named Li Cheng are both housekeepers and gatekeepers, doing everything. The old mansion has few owners, and Qin Liushi doesn't like to make a fuss. Just a few people are enough, but with a large number of people, it feels a bit out of place. In a hurry, Qin Liushi placed Gu Shi on the makeshift delivery bed. He glanced at her and felt a slight chill in his heart. After only a while, the black aura on this third aunt's face grew even stronger, and she couldn't pass this level. She looked at her huge belly and casually touched her wrist. It was a twin. It's really adding insult to injury. Qin Liushi took off the jade pendant hanging from his waist and tied it to Gu's collar. He glanced at Qi Huang, who had been going back and forth, but remained silent. The latter walked out again. Mrs. Qin and others were stunned when they saw this action and looked at Qin Liushi. Qin Liushi remained calm and said, "This is Yu Rui, who has been blessed by the light. May the third aunt have a safe childbirth." Mrs. Qin's face warmed slightly, and there was also a hint of hope in her eyes. The woman who first hugged Gu, also known as Qin Liushi's legitimate mother Wang, said, "Sheer has a heart. Your third aunt will definitely ensure the safety of the mother and son." As the saying goes, seeing the weak person on the bed and thinking of the recent changes in the family, the sadness in the eyes of Wang and others grew stronger. When Chi Huang returned to the guest room holding a small box, he saw that the people in the room were all looking worried. He couldn't help but tiptoe to Qin Liuxi's side and stay honest. Due to Qin Liuxi, she didn't actually have much liking for the Qin family, but the Qin family came suddenly and was in a slump. In addition, there was a young woman in front of her who was obviously going to give birth prematurely. No matter how unhappy she was, she wouldn't add mold to this situation. Wenpa hasn't come yet. Mrs. Qin was a bit anxious and looked outside the door several times. Qin Liuxi's voice was cold and he said, "It's raining outside now, and the road is not easy to walk. It's a sudden invitation, so it doesn't necessarily mean you'll be at home. I'm afraid it'll take some time." Mrs. Qin's lips tightened even tighter. As he was speaking, a few people walked outside the door, but they were the second wife of the Qin family, Xie Shi, and two aunts. One of them was also the biological mother of Qin Liuxi, Wan Shi. Entering the room, Aunt Wan's gaze first fell on Qin Liuxi. Qin Liuxi also looked over, with the mother and daughter's eyes facing each other. Aunt Wan fixed her gaze and frowned, feeling somewhat dissatisfied and depressed. This daughter was born a meatball, but as she grew up, she was actually inexperienced. If it weren't for her long hair, she might not be like an ant. Qin Liuxi, on the other hand, sighed inwardly. Her birth mother, who was already in her 30s and had 2 children, looked at her face, soft and fair. Even if she didn't apply any makeup, she didn't lose any of her beauty, just like those 18 young girls, pure and lustful. Looking at her naked body again, her chest is like a chest, and her waist is like a waist. I still pity her when I see her, and she truly deserves to be a stunning aunt, the kind that is favored. It seems that she did not suffer any injustice in the Qin family. Not only did she not suffer, but she also lived very well, so good that she even forgot about having a daughter. Qin Liuxi bowed slightly to her and said, "Auntie." Aunt Wan opened her mouth and said, "You look a bit ugly, unlike me and your younger brother." End of this chapter. Chapter 3. Auntie helps with childbirth. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 3. Auntie helps with childbirth. It's a bit ugly. Qin Liuxi. Are you pretty enough to eat as a meal? It's not like stealing one's life. Mrs. Qin coughed and gave Aunt Wan a displeased glance. Is this the time for small talk? Not sensible. Aunt Wan immediately hesitated. Mrs. Qin then said, "Where are the children?" Xie hurriedly said, "Aunt Pan is leading us to settle down. Mother, 3 younger siblings." She looked at Gu Shi lying in bed with a hint of sympathy in her eyes. Normally, she couldn't appreciate Gu Shi's gentle and peaceful demeanor, but now that we are both women and experiencing difficulties together, she is somewhat worried about her. Not yet, Wang replied first and then said to Mrs. Qin, "Mother, you can go down and wash up first, and then drink a bowl of ginger soup. We'll do it here." "Let's go, Madam and Auntie. We've all been soaked in the rain, and we've had some drinks. We'll just stay here for the time being," said Aunt Wan. Mrs. Qin walked up to her daughter-in-law's bed and saw her moaning in pain. She said, "Gu, don't shout either. Save your energy, you'll have to give birth to 2. Gu opened her eyes slightly, tears rolling down her face. Her eyes were a bit confused and panicked, and she said, "Mother, I." Mrs. Qin covered her mouth with her hand and said, "Don't be afraid, there are still us." She looked at Qin Liuxi again and said, "Have someone prepare hot water, basin, scissors, bedding, and cloth. If possible, invite a doctor to come and sit down. Then add some brown sugar to the ginger soup, beat 2 eggs, and let your third aunt replenish her strength. If you have ginseng slices, also prepare them. She's planning for the worst. If she doesn't invite Grandma Wan, they'll have to deliver on their own." Fortunately, although it took some time, Grandma Wan was still invited. After a thorough examination, Grandma Wan's face looked a bit ugly. She put down the blanket covering the mother and walked towards Qin Liushi. Qin Laotai was about to ask, but when she saw that Grandma Wen had already bowed to Qin Liushi, she was taken aback for a moment. "Miss, this lady hasn't had enough months yet, but she has seen redness and tears, and her cervix hasn't opened. She's afraid she needs to take oxytocin. Also, she needs some preparation. Please show me, big and small." Qin Liushi didn't react much to these words, but the women present all changed their faces. All of them are from the past, and most of them have become mothers. They don't understand that giving birth to a woman is like breaking through a gate of hell, and the current hurdle is paved with swords and swords. Any weakness in Mrs. Qin's life is the result of one corpse and 3 lives. Mrs. Qin understood this and felt her feet soften. She clenched the Buddha beads in her hand, and her wrinkled face grew increasingly withered and aged. The 2 aunts were already sobbing softly, and Mrs. Qin, listening to the ominous tone, shouted in a low voice, "Why are you crying? Go out." The crying came to an abrupt end. Qin Liushi then said, "Grandmother, what do you think?" Mrs. Qin glanced at the daughter-in-law in bed and said wearily, "Please have the doctor prescribe a prescription to make it over." Qin Liushi nodded, glanced at Qi Huang, and the 2 of them walked out. "You went to my small warehouse to pick up medicinal herbs and cooked them yourself," Qin Liushi whispered to Qi Huang. Qi Huang had no objection and walked down quickly. Qin Liushi looked at the shadows inside the room through the window, rubbed his eyebrows, sighed, and took the medicine box to the side room. Opening the medicine box, she took paper, pen, and dark red cinnabar from inside, slightly condensed and lifted her breath, and drew notes with her pen. She wrote steadily and quickly, with her sharp pen tip resting on the paper, the force penetrating through the paper, as if there was a flash of golden light. After the flash of golden light, the incomprehensible lines on the paper suddenly became agile. End of this chapter. Chapter 4. Draw talismans to ensure the safety of Aunt San. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 4. Draw talismans to ensure the safety of Aunt San. Qin Liushi drew 3 talismans in a row, stacked them into a triangle, and then put the things away before returning to the delivery room. At this moment, Qi Huang had already gone and returned, holding a steaming bowl of soup and medicine in his hand. When his owner nodded, he personally fed the medicine to Gu. Wang took a step forward and wanted to help, but the girl named Qi Huang didn't know how to use her ingenuity. She easily helped the person up and poured the medicine in. Qin Liushi tied 2 spiritual talismans at the head of the bed and under the pillow, while the other one was kept as a backup. Everyone looked strange when they saw this scene. "Sheer, what are you?" Wang's eyebrows twitched. How could this girl be so talkative? Qin Liushi spoke awkwardly, "Oh, a peace symbol, to ensure peace." Everyone. It sounds a bit strange, but I dare not say it. The effect of the oxytocin was very fast, and Gu began to cry out for pain again. Only then did she open her mouth and was persuaded by Grandma Wan, "Madam, don't worry, with the young lady around, you will definitely ensure the safety of the mother and son." Gu was taken aback for a moment, but didn't take it to heart. She thought it was just comfort and looked at Wang with teary eyes. "Sister-in-law, bite my handkerchief," she said. Wang folded a clean handkerchief and put it in her mouth. Mrs. Qin saw that Qin Liushi was still inside the house and said, "You are a young lady who has not yet left the palace, so don't stay here. Wait outside. Wang's Lady Mei, you can help here." "Okay." Qin Liushi obediently pushed the door out. Qi Huang handed over a cup of tea and joked, "Miss, are you really sitting like this? The one who is suffering inside, but her 3rd aunt." Qin Liushi took a sip of tea, glanced at her, and said, "As a young lady who has not yet left the palace, how can I watch a woman give birth? The Qin family, even if the building collapses, used to be an official family with a 3rd-rank official. She is also a grand official lady." Qi Huang almost laughed and said, "You don't mind your face hurting so much. Just last month, when you passed by the Peach Blossom Villa, you even picked up a chubby little boy for the Deng family's difficult to give birth to. Qin Liushi didn't change his color and said, after eating someone's peach blossom pastry, if this cause and effect is established, naturally we will have to repay it. Qi Huang smiled and then restrained his expression, asking, Miss, have you never predicted such a calamity for the Qin family? Qin Liushi hesitated for a moment. Can she tell Qi Huang that she came out even when she was a child? After thinking for a while, he said, people have 3 declines and 6 prosperities, and a family is no exception. Flowers cannot turn red in 100 days. The Qin family has been sailing smoothly for decades, and now they have suffered from this calamity, which is also one of the fatal consequences of the villain's calculations. When the villains achieve their goals, they avoid their sharpness, break through first and then stand up. The Green Mountains are still here, and there will always be a day when they can see the mountains through the clouds and mist. Qi Huang said, Miss, as you said, one day with you, the Qin family won't really collapse. Qin Liushi smiled silently and picked up his tea. It's all due to cause and effect. However, with so many members of the Qin family, some old and weak women and children have just arrived, making it a bit busy. On the way to exile, there are still a few unarmed men, old or young, who need silver money to take care of everything. Miss, your idle days are coming to an end in the future. Qi Huang suddenly said, with a tone of schadenfreude. Qin Liushi. This tea is a bit bitter, I can't drink it anymore. She suddenly got up and stood by the window, gazing at the pattering rain. Outside the city gate, a group of guards wearing raincoat and bamboo hats rode into Li City, knocked on the door of the inn, and stayed overnight to avoid the rain. Going into the room, a noble man opened a picture scroll, on which was a handsome face that was indecisive between male and female. His long black hair was tied up in a bun with only a bamboo hairpin, and his expression was indifferent. The corners of his lips were slightly lowered, with a look of disgust towards all things in this world. He stood in front of a Taoist temple, with a gentleman ready to leave in the wind, as if in front of him, everyone had a sense of being mortal. Fix it up, we'll go to Qingping Temple tomorrow when it's clear. Qi Qian put the painting scroll back into the copper tube. It is said that there is a medical practice called Buqiu in Licheng, with exquisite medical skills and the mastery of the Taoist Tai Su method. Through pulse diagnosis, one can know a person's good or bad fortune, misfortune, status, and even predict the fate of future generations, which is very mysterious. And he went to seek medical treatment for his grandmother. Let's take over the minor repair here. Thank you all. End of this chapter. Chapter 5, Chapters 5 to 7. Is Miss a bastard? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 5, Chapters 5 to 7. Is Miss a bastard? The woman gave birth and half of her foot collapsed into the gates of hell. This is not a lie. Qin Liushi listened to the commotion coming from the delivery room and closed his eyes. Qi Huang glanced at the hourglass, which had been tossed and turned all night. It was almost dawn, and blood and water came out one by one, but there was no sound of baby crying. Instead, the movement inside was getting quieter and quieter. Miss, I'm afraid it's... Qin Liushi had already stood up, and before she could move her steps, a person stumbled out from inside. It was her aunt Qin Mainyang, who had been taken home due to an incident with the Qin family. Her eyes were dark and her face turned pale. Born, unable to be born, doctor, where is the doctor? Qin Mainyang's lips were covered in blood scabs and dry skin, with 6 gods and no control. Qin Liushi walked in quickly, and when Grandma Wen saw her, she seemed to have seen a savior. She exclaimed urgently, Miss, this lady has fainted. Mrs. Qin's body was trembling, and she bit her tongue again as she looked at Qin Liushi and said, What are you doing here as a girl? Go out quickly and ask the doctor to come and give your third aunt an injection. One didn't expect Qin Liushi's family to be so bold and exhausted, saying, Sheer, the delivery room is stained with blood. Follow my grandmother's advice, you should go out first. Qin Liushi ignored the bloody smell lingering on his nose and walked to the delivery bed. He picked up Gu's wrist and touched it, then put it down again. When he saw the earrings she was wearing, he took them off and said, "Is this Aunt San's? You're giving me a reward." Everyone was stunned when they saw her take off the earring and put it into their pocket. Mrs. Qin rose in anger and pointed at her, You. She was panting heavily, with a sign of fainting at any moment. The girl in her family, who is such an indiscriminate bastard. Sheer, apologize to your grandmother quickly. Wang Shi saw that the old lady was very angry. Although she was surprised by Qin Liushi's behavior, she didn't want to burn oil on the fire at this time. She only said to the old lady, "Mother, this child is probably scared silly. Please forgive me. Sister-in-law, I don't look like it, but my eyelids are shallow." Xie sneered with pleasure. Second brother and sister. Qin Liushi, feeling flustered by the noise, glanced at a few people and said, "Don't make a fuss. Except for Grandma Wan, you should all wait outside. If you want to see Aunt San give birth safely, then." Everyone was taken aback. What does this mean? Xie let out a chuckle. This is really a bit silly. Qi Huang, burning incense, transforming symbols. Yes. Qin Liushi had already taken out a box from the box, opened it, and inside was a row of gold needles, big and small. Seeing everyone clung still, he couldn't help but look over and say, "Why don't you go out yet?" His tone was cold and he didn't treat everyone as elders at all. Mrs. Qin scolded in a low voice, "What are you doing? It's not time for you to act recklessly now. Hurry up and get the doctor over." "There is no doctor." Mrs. Qin was taken aback. "What? She wants to have a child safely, only I can help her." Qin Liushi had already twisted a golden needle. Mrs. Qin looked at the golden needle shining under the candlelight and felt a thump in her heart. Are you trying to give your third aunt a needle? Sheer, do you know medical skills?" Wang and the others also had some disbelief, they had never heard of it before. "Bastard, what kind of medical skills do you know? This is just nonsense." Mrs. Qin was furious and stopped Qin Liushi, looking incredulous. "How old is this girl? She has been raising her in her old house all along. When did she learn medicine? This is to play with her 3 aunts, mother, and son." Qin Liushi's patience has disappeared, don't believe her. Recently, there has been martial law, no comments, no fragmented thoughts, and no display, emo. Anyway, I'm here. End of this chapter. Chapter 6. Dawn breaks, babies cry. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 6. Dawn breaks, babies cry. Qin Liushi was angry. To be honest, she is a strange soul and doesn't have much emotional attachment to the Qin family. When she passed by, it was also when she was just sent back to her old house for foster care at the age of 5, and she grew up on her own. Although it was not her original wish, she occupied the body and formed a causal relationship with the Qin family. She had a causal connection with these people, but in terms of kinship and respect, to be honest, the Qin family was not as good as the Qihuang and Qinpi siblings who stayed by her side. At this moment, Mrs. Qin still doesn't believe her and prevents her from saving people, which really makes Qin Liushi angry. "Madam, are you sure you want to stop me? If you keep dragging on, she will end up with 3 lives." Qin Liushi pointed coldly at the person on the delivery bed. "Mother, the 3rd younger brother and sister are going to die soon," Qi Menyang said with a crying voice. Everyone was shocked and turned around to look. Gu's face was colorless, her eyes tightly closed, and the undulation of her chest was already weak and slow, making it invisible. "This way, even if we invite another doctor over, we may not be able to make it in time." Mrs. Qin's face was withered and she stumbled back, tears streaming down her eyes. "Madam, let the young lady administer the needle." If we delay any longer, we won't be able to make it in time. Mrs. Wan also spoke nervously. Although she was used to seeing scenes of one corpse and 2 lives, now there are only 3 lives. If we really don't have them, it would be a sin. Those who are stable mothers naturally only want to see their mother and son safe, which is good for their reputation. Wang pursed her lips and advised, "Mother, that's all we can do. A dead horse should be a living horse doctor, and one can only rely on fate." Mrs. Qin closed her eyes, didn't turn her face, and nodded heavily. Whether it's luck or misfortune, it depends on whether the heavens can open their eyes. Qi Huang had already ignited a fragrance, calming the mind and calming the mind. He then infused the talisman prepared by Qin Liushi in warm water and arrived at the bedside. Qin Liushi saw them compromise, snorted, and casually twisted a golden needle, piercing directly into Mrs. Qin's big hole. 2 exclamations of surprise came out. Qin Liushi turned his head and glared coldly, making a big noise. Mrs. Qin's face turned pale with fear and her hands trembled uncontrollably. Gu woke up with a slow moan, his pupils slowly focused, but his eyes were filled with despair. "Drink it." Qin Liushi took the cup of talisman water from Qi Huang's hand and brought it to her mouth. Her voice was cold, as if a cold spring had entered her ear. Gu instinctively opened her mouth and, under the astonishment of the crowd, drank all the water. Qin Liushi took several other golden needles and inserted them on her body, reaching in on both sides, Higu acupoint, and Sanyingio. The needles were inserted steadily and quickly. "Cheer up, if Uncle San can receive the good news of your mother and son's safety, he will be comforted on the way to exile to some extent. But if it were a corpse with 3 lives, he probably wouldn't be able to survive. If my younger sister were to lose her parents at a young age, how miserable would it be?" Her words were both poisonous and ruthless, but they struck Gu Shi's heart like a strong needle, forcing her to tears and filling her body with strength. "She can't die, she has to live with a few children. Grandma Wan, come on." Qin Liushi glanced at Grandma Wan, while he was twisting a golden needle and piercing her acupoints, reciting an unknown spell. Grandma Wan let out a sigh, explained to Gu a few times, and pushed her belly. This scene fell in the eyes of Mrs. Qin and everyone, and her gaze at Qin Liushi was as terrifying as that of a monster. "The girl in front of me seems different from other girls. At dawn, infants cry." End of this chapter. Chapter 7. Miss, are you good or no rules? You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 7. Miss, are you good or no rules? The new life brought joy and dispelled some gloom for the Qin family, who had experienced great changes. Mrs. Qin looked at a pair of little grandsons, her eyes filled with joy but also with a hint of worry, tears streaming down her face. If this pair of twins had been born a year earlier, it would have been great, but now they are 7-star premature babies, so weak and thin, I don't know if they can survive. Mother, you have also worked hard day and night. Let's go down and rest for now. It's better for your wives to control this place, Wang said softly. Mrs. Qin nodded and said, let someone go and invite 2 wet nurses back. Whether Gu's baby was born prematurely or difficult to conceive, she has already lost most of her life. She still needs to be carefully cared for, and relying on her to feed her is not enough. She can only hire a wet nurse. Before Wang could speak, Xia opened her mouth and said, Mother, where did we get the money to hire 2 wet nurses? The plagiarism came suddenly, and Lady Meng's family deliberately suppressed it. They didn't even bring anything valuable, they even took off a lot of the precious jewelry they were wearing. Why did they hire 2 nannies for the silver money at once? Even if we lose money, we can still lose 2 nannies' monthly income. Mrs. Qin said coldly. Xia dared not touch the mold and said, Mother, since that's the case, let's buy more maids and women. There are only 3 people in our family who came with us. How can we handle this big family, big and small? There are only a few servants coming and going in this old house. Qin Lao Tai was so angry that she leaned back. This silly guy, when the Qin family was still the same as before, surrounded by servants, was so beautiful to her. First, go and invite 2 wet nurses. Mrs. Qin was too lazy to argue with this silly guy, and only looked at her eldest daughter. In law's instructions, these 2 children are already premature and need to be taken care of carefully. The wet nurses will invite 2 good ones, and your 3 siblings will also have to sit for a full 2-month period. Yes. West girl. Mrs. Qin only spoke up and looked around, only to find that Qin Liushi had long been gone, which left her stunned. Qi Huang had already tidied up Gu Shi with Wenpe, and upon seeing the situation, he said, "My young lady has been tinkering all night. Let's go rest first. Please let the old lady also go and rest." Mrs. Qin. Xie snorted lightly and said, "The elders are still here and have been fussing all night." She left without even saying a word to the younger generation. It's really unruly. Qi Huang said calmly, "My young lady gives third lady acupuncture and massage, which is extremely exhausting and physically demanding. Moreover, her body and bones are not very good, and second lady should be aware of this. I don't think it would be difficult for our young lady to handle such a small matter. After all, the reason why the eldest lady was fostered in the old house was because of this reason." Xie was extremely angry, and the dead girl had sharp teeth and a sharp mouth. Qi Huang bowed to Mrs. Qin and said, "Madam, I still have to follow the instructions of the eldest lady to dispense medicine for the third lady. Please leave first." Mrs. Qin waved her hand wearily. As soon as Qi Huang and Wenpe walked out, there was a cold snort from old lady Qin scolding towards Xie. "Mother, don't hold your breath and be careful with your body. Second younger brother and sister, quickly apologize to your mother and accompany her to rest." Wang was extremely dissatisfied with these 2 younger brothers and sisters in her heart. At any critical moment, she didn't feel tired, she was already exhausted. Xie had no choice but to bow down and say a few flattering words before helping the old lady out. However, after only 1 step, the old lady's body softened and she fell down. Mother. End of this chapter. Chapter 8. The auspiciousness and inauspiciousness of losing loved ones for the first time. You are listening at Novel Full. Audio. Chapter 8. The auspiciousness and inauspiciousness of losing loved ones for the first time. Qin Liushi withdrew his hand to support his pulse, his face looking a bit ugly. She hates being disturbed while sleeping. Xie, how is your grandmother? Wang's heart lifted as she saw Qin Liushi's face not looking good. Qin Liushi lifted his eyelids and asked a question that was out of reach. How old is the old lady this year? Wang and others were taken aback. Your grandmother is also 55 years old this year, Wang frowned and asked, but Xie, what does this have to do with your grandmother's body? Qin Liushi put Mrs. Qin's hand back into the blanket and said indifferently, the old lady is getting old and coincided with a huge change. I believe she has been holding on to her mental state recently. Now that the 10 strings have loosened, she can't hold on anymore. She is feeling anxious and worried, and only then has she fainted. Her fingers curved, but she did not reveal the wealth, poverty, and good or bad fortune of the old lady's life calculated by the Ethereum pulse method. Mrs. Qin has a noble background, a successful marriage, and a family of children and grandchildren. However, she now has mixed patterns in her tears and her children have poor luck, which may make it difficult for her to enjoy the happiness of family. In addition, her pulse also indicates a bleak evening, her son is disabled, and she herself cannot live a long life. So Qin Liushi asked the old lady about her age, 55, time is running out. Qin Liushi lowered her eyes, and the expression on her face made her even more indifferent. How should we treat it? No, can you treat it? Sister-in-law, it's safer to call a doctor to come and see your mother. Xie was a bit anxious. The old lady is not only her mother-in-law, but also her aunt. She is her support in the Qin family, so there should be no trouble. Qin Liushi is a little girl who has learned medicine from somewhere, and she may not have even become a master, so we cannot expect her. Qin Liushi's face sank and he said, "Are you questioning me?" Unhappy, surprisingly questioning her abilities. Wang looked at Qin Liushi's stern face and glared at Xie, saying, "I think Xie's diagnosis is good. When something happens at home, she relies on her mother to control everything. Now that she has relaxed, it is inevitable that she will have a backlash. However, Xie, the old lady used to be a bit bad. Can you ask a doctor to help her pulse?" Qin Liushi didn't object much to the eldest wife's legitimate mother and said, "Whatever you want." She then said to Qi Huang, "Let Uncle Li go to the Song clinic and ask Dr. Song to diagnose the old lady's pulse." "Yes, miss." Qin Liushi dropped these words and was about to leave, but was stopped by the Wang family again. "Xie, there has been a big upheaval at home, and there are only 3 servants we can bring with us. 2 of them are Ding Mama and Juer, who are next to your grandmother, and 1 is Shen Mama, who is next to me. Now, your 3rd aunt also needs to hire 2 wet nurses to take care of and feed your 2 little cousins. We are not very familiar with Licheng, do you think about this person's side?" Qin Liushi said, "Just instruct Uncle Li to bring someone over. The rest." She paused and said to Qi Huang, "Follow your wife's orders first and help settle all these miscellaneous matters. Miss Ku, there is no one around to serve you." Qi Huang hesitated. "Don't you still have tangerine peel?" "I'm not going out either. If there's anything, I'll let him know." Qin Liushi's eyebrows became restless, and she wanted to catch some sleep now. Qi Huang listened to her tone and knew that she was lacking sleep and impatient, so he quickly responded. Qin Liushi left the room without looking back. "Sister-in-law, take a look at her. Are you throwing a face at us? You really need to teach her how to behave." Xie was furious. Wang felt a bit impatient and glanced at her coldly, saying, "Second brother and sister, have you forgotten what's happening in our family now?" Xie was slightly stunned, pursed her lips, and said, "I'll go see my mother." Wang rubbed her eyebrows, feeling exhausted. The days of frustration had just begun. Q reading has been very strict lately, it seems like it hasn't synced well. Some children's shoes can't even find the article. This is Q reading's first release, so wait, let me code myself alone and enjoy myself. Let's have some fun, I'll wait for you. End of this chapter. Chapter 9. Money Comes, Buy Everything for You. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 9. Money Comes, Buy Everything for You. Qin Liushi slept for 2 days, and when he walked out of the room, the sky was covered in red clouds, so beautiful. It's just that the beautiful scenery was ruined by some discordant noises shortly after being appreciated. Qin Liushi's joyful mood instantly dissipated, pursed his lips, and headed towards where the sound came from. The old house of the Qin family is a 3-in house. In the past, only Qin Liushi, the owner, lived there. With such a large house, she only occupied a side courtyard near the back street for easy access. The noise is in the flower hall. When Qin Liushi arrived, Aunt Li and Xiao Xue stood at the door, looking a bit aggrieved. When they saw her, their eyes lit up. "Miss," the 2 of them saluted her together. Qin Liushi waved his hand and stepped in. "What's wrong?" She lifted her eyes and scanned the vast flower hall, which was full of human heads. Everyone, big and small, looked at her, and some of them had a calm expression on their faces. In the flower hall, there are 2 large round tables, on which several dishes that cannot be called delicate dishes are placed. A steamed fish, a plate of pickled Chinese cabbage, stir-fried pork water, 2 plates of Buddhist food, and a large pot of mantu. Qin Liushi raised his eyebrows, and it was time for dinner, but obviously, these dishes did not meet the needs of this group of hosts. "What's going on?" Xie pointed to the dishes on the table and said with a calm face, "Miss Shi, look at what these are. Are they human food?" Our servants don't even eat them, so this is dinner. Yesterday was the same, so I won't say anything about it. It's still the same today. If the kitchen staff can't make them, then someone with the ability will take charge." As she spoke, she poked out Auntie and her daughter with her eyes. Auntie was impatient and quickly said, "Miss, in the past, there were few people in the house, and you never liked those big fish and big meat. The purchases of the maidservant's family were also light. These days, there were suddenly many more people added to the family, and the buying habits could not be changed for a while. They only bought with more impulse, and on this silver." Auntie paused, feeling a bit difficult to say. A mansion's procurement costs a considerable amount of money per day. In the past, there was only one master in this old mansion, Chinryoshi, and the rest were only a few servants. Except for Chinryoshi's more refined food, these servants were just like ordinary families, and it was enough. But these past few days, more than 10 people have suddenly added, and they are struggling with money. How can they buy it? Just buy some good dishes for the sake of money, those that are full, exquisite or not, that's beyond my imagination. Now these masters are in trouble, and they are also aggrieved and find it difficult. A clever woman cannot cook without rice. These 3-year-old children all know the truth, right? Nonsense, I saw you secretly stewing a cup of red dates and lean meat soup for her to keep. A 13 or 14-year-old girl frowned and pointed at Chinryoshi. Chinryoshi glanced at her and saw that she was the cousin of Uncle Air's family, named Chin Mingyue. Auntie hesitated for a moment and explained, "Miss hasn't had any meals for 2 days. Why not keep this cup of soup for her?" "Are you saying that the young lady is even more refined and expensive than the old lady?" Xia immediately continued. Auntie's words were stuck. "No, this. In her heart, the young lady is more noble than anyone else, but here, how dare she say that she must give the big and small sisters an unfilial reputation?" Auntie looked at Chinryoshi for help. Chinryoshi looked at Xia with a hint of coldness in his eyes. Xia's eyebrows and bones have no flesh, and her cheekbones are sharp. She has a strong personality, is domineering, has a cold and thin nature, values interests, and is always driven by profit. She doesn't want to have any deep friendships with such people and dislikes them. Chinryoshi's tone was slightly cold as he said, "So you're already full and trying to make trouble here. If you want to have a delicious dinner with meat and vegetables, do you need to add supplements like bird's nest and ginseng? This is not impossible, Auntie. Where's the silver?" She extended her hand in front of Xia and said, "Here's the money, I'll buy everything for you." End of this chapter. Chapter 10. Reasonably being a human with a tail pinched. You are listening at novelfull.audio. Chapter 10. Reasonably being a human with a tail pinched. If you want to eat well, bring the silver. Xia stared at Chinryoshi's slender, scallion white fingers, her face flushed with suppressed emotion. "Money, where does she have any silver money?" "It's just that, it's just a little bit. She dares not take it out to make up for it casually, otherwise if she wants to use some silver in the future, she really won't have any hair." What silver?" She dodged her gaze and stuttered, "You don't know what's going on in our family, I don't have any silver." Chinryoshi smiled and said, "Oh, Auntie Air is now clear-headed. She knows what the situation is with the Chin family. I thought you were naturally optimistic, and even if you knew it, you should still live a good life surrounded by servants and enjoying the delicacies of the mountains and wild food." This remark, like a slap, struck the faces of those present, burning and sobering. Yes, the Chin family today is not the third-rank official family of the past, but the ordinary civilians who have been raided. They not only cannot afford to be served by someone as high and mighty as before, but only talk about which silver shop has produced new jewelry, which ready-to-wear shop has produced new patterns of clothing, or the wealth and status of eating delicacies and wild delicacies. These seemingly extravagant things have all disappeared from them and no longer exist. Everyone glanced at the dishes on the table again, feeling a chill in their hearts. They couldn't live a life of wealth and prosperity. They might not even be able to eat the meaty dishes because the main male members of their family were exiled, and these women and children, who can earn money. Panic and confusion once again enveloped them like dark clouds, suffocating them. Xia felt a bit ashamed of being run on. But soon, her face darkened as she realized that she was at least an elder, and this girl didn't distinguish between high and low. Just as she was about to speak, Qin Liushi looked at Qin Mingyue again and asked, "Sister, do you recognize the current situation? It's right to consider yourself a noble young lady, but you also have to consider the situation, right? It's a big deal not to recognize the situation clearly." Look at Qin Mingyue with sunken corners of her eyes, as if she's about to hide them. According to physiognomy, this is a marital palace, and the sunken person's marital life is often not smooth. This cousin has an unstable personality, and her emotions are easily irritable and joyful. Her future marriage luck may not be beautiful, and her home may be unstable. Qin Mingyue stiffened all over, gritted her teeth, and spoke slightly softly, "Even if I'm not a noble young lady, big sister is not. They are all Qin family members, unable to write two Qin characters with a single stroke. They are in a state of decline, and she is not the same. She is just a commoner. Moreover, she is only an illegitimate daughter recorded under the name of her legitimate mother. Who can be more noble than her?" Qin Mingyue thought this way and then straightened her chest. "Oh, I'm different from you. I've always regarded me as an orphan," Qin Liushi said lightly. Qin Mingyue. Wang and Aunt Wan. They are still standing here alive. Xia caught the beginning of the conversation and said, "Sister-in-law, take a look. This girl really needs to be raised well. Isn't that a curse on you and big brother?" Qin Liushi snorted coldly. "She was raised in her old house at a young age, and now when we come to raise her, she wants to see who dares to bring up such a thing." Wang said, "Second younger brother and sister, there is also some truth in what Shimai said. Our Qin family is no longer the same as before. We must be frugal and not as wealthy as before. If you really want to add some dishes, you can use some private money to have Aunt Li cook for you. Your sister-in-law is right." A weak voice sounded from the door. Everyone looked and saw that Mrs. Qin was being supported by Grandma Ding as she walked in. They couldn't help but greet her and salute together. "Grandmother." "An old lady." "Mother." Wang stepped forward to support her, speaking with concern, "Why did you come too?" Mrs. Qin sat in the main seat, looked around, and spoke with a dignified expression, "If I didn't come, I would have forgotten that we are the Qin family who were robbed by the Holy Emperor and should be human beings." End of this chapter.